My name is Megan Tatey, and I am the blog editor for Free Press, and I'm so excited that all of you are here. Before I dive into talking about Free Press, I will tell a little bit of a personal story from me and sort of what drives my work and what brought me to Free Press. I've been here for about 3 years. Before I came to Free Press, I was an investigative journalist, mostly for independent media. And in 2008, on my own volition, I went down to Belize to do some reporting about food politics and different organic practices that were happening in the global south. And I spent about 6 weeks working with some farmers who were cultivating organic vanilla for the first time. And it was a beautiful, amazing story. And I came back with, an armload of amazing interviews. And when I went to pitch this story to both independent and mainstream media, I got rejection letters again and again. And I'm not saying this because I wasn't used to rejection. As a journalist, you sort of get used to getting that on a sort of daily basis. When I graduated from college, my advisor pulled me into his office and said, you want to be a writer? Look at this, and pulled out a drawer full of rejection letters so that I could really get used to getting rejected more than I would get accepted. But as this continued to happen, and as I had this, amazing article at my fingertips and I couldn't get it placed anywhere, I started to think more and more that it wasn't just my writing. Like, is it just me that's just getting rejected? It has to be something else. There's something deeper happening here, and in fact there's a systemic problem that really stifles female voices, and it stifles voices of incredible stories that don't get published both in the mainstream media and the independent press. It isn't just a coincidence that these articles aren't getting published. It isn't just a coincidence that we're seeing shows about women flailing about trying to find the perfect wedding gown on every single channel. It's not like we're all saying, please give us more of those TV shows. There's a very real system in place that's creating all of these things. So that's what this panel is about, and we'll get to a lot of the different specific media policy issues. And I'll just read a little bit of an opening that I have. The ability to express ourselves freely and access information about women's issues is fundamental to our equality and self-determination. Yet in our media system, women's voices, viewpoints, and bylines are largely excluded. And TV programming, music, movies, advertising can perpetuate sexist, racist, violent, and demeaning images of women and girls. Women are also far less likely to be guests on news shows or cited as experts, which means that viewers don't hear their perspectives on the issues. And I wonder who's deciding what those are. Why are women misrepresented or absent from the media? Women comprise 51% of the population, but own less than 6% of TV and commercial radio stations. And media ownership matters. Owners hire the staff who decide what's news and what's not. They pick the programs and air the perspectives that get broadcast, hence Bridezilla over and over again. Ownership and control over new media matter too. The internet is the future of radio, TV, and phone communications. Access to an affordable internet and the skills to use it are becoming essential to applying for jobs, using educational tools, and participating in our society. Internet access also allows people to create and distribute their own media, offering alternatives and counterpoint to mainstream media. Yet internet access is largely divided along geographic, class, and race lines that exclude women and girls. And with the new net neutrality rules with the FCC and the House's attempts to roll back those weak rules, big phone and cable companies can stifle women's voices online and on our mobile phones. Think that it can't happen? Verizon blocked pro-choice text messages from NARAL in 2007. This is why it's imperative that women get involved in in changing media policy, the laws that have allowed this media system to happen. Like I said before, it's not a coincidence that we're seeing all of this. So in this panel, we'll dig a little bit deeper into the issues, and we'll get firsthand perspectives from leading female activists, writers, and journalists. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist, Serena, and she's going to come up and give you a little presentation about herself and her work, and we'll just go down the line and do that. We'll then break up and talk about very specific issues, and then we'll take some Q&A and comments and perspectives from the audience. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having all of us here today. I speak on behalf of all the wonderful women that are up here. And these are sisters who are not ashamed to talk and tell the story, because this thing is real, y'all. I heard some people say when she mentioned about the text message campaign that went out. And this is, when you look at a beautiful campaign like that that's using cell phone technology, which is so interactive, which is so right now, which is so purposeful and so relevant, and to see a major conglomerate like that shut that stuff down, that's BS. That's BS. It really is. So today I am Sister Song's representative, Serena Garcia, and thank you. Sister Song, many different women of all different backgrounds and ethnicities and intersections, but we all come together with all of our intersectionality, and we still sing the same harmony. Women's rights, baby. Women's rights. All day, every day. The struggle always continues, and our particular angle is reproductive justice, and that boils down to 3 basic principles. The right for a woman to have a child, not to have a child, and to parent the child and children that she has in a healthy and safe environment, free of governmental intervention. Get out of my womb is basically what we're saying. Get out of my womb. And so many folks are trying to get into our womb. I was watching, I think, one of the talk shows late last night, and I looked at Planned Parenthood continue to come up, and all the awful things that are being said about Planned Parenthood, abortion this and abortion that. What they're doing is getting rid of access, trying to get rid of access, not to abortion singularly, but reproductive health services in general to women who otherwise would not be able to have the access or the agency or the provision to get them. I'm just saying. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to some things that I want to talk about. I'm going to do a real quick media analysis. Our organization has experienced great media failure, serious media failure, especially during our work to protect reproductive justice and Black women. During a very sudden surge of anti-women legislation and publicity that happened early in Georgia, the home of our headquarters, just last year. What started out as a calculated anti-abortion legislation and dehumanizing billboards campaign depicting Black women as the agents of their own genocide and other agencies in terms of eugenics. How the heck do you put all that together in the same pot? Doesn't even taste right. This stirred into some type of sparring match, not only against the usual conservative opponents, but also an interesting head that popped up, the male-dominated media industry. And we said, well, darn, we already have to deal with these conservatives and fight them on eugenics and genocide and Black women's choices around what they want to do with their body and the conditions that are preventing them in some cases to do and make the decisions that they need to make. So now we have this other opponent, male-dominated media. Here we go. And it continues to happen, not only from Georgia of last year, but even now. Black billboards depicting Black women as these terrible monsters that are killing their own children. The billboards popped up in Georgia last year. They're about 87 strong. Right to Life organizations had funded them. You got to follow the money trail. And other very extreme pro-life organizations. And let me go ahead and put this piece out here real quick. Sister's song represents the voices of pro-choice, but we also represent the voices of pro-life women too. Because what a lot of folks don't understand is even when you make the choice to give birth, that's still a choice, baby. It's still a choice. So we represent all of that, all of that. But what we don't represent is people being put in a situation, women in particular, who are not provided that option. That's what we're talking about, is preserving that option. So we provide education and advocacy around that. Yes, we're the rebel rousers, and we're happy to say it, we're not ashamed to say it. So when we look at this issue, our national coordinator, Loretta Ross, has been quoted in feminist and progressive media, and we love y'all color lines. Thank you for putting that thing out there, and I'm going to talk about it too. I'm going to go ahead and shout out before she even gets up here. We talked about the fact that progressive and feminist media will always have our back in different respects regarding the justice movement on a whole, but certainly reproductive justice singularly. But this firestorm of legislation and publicity and media failure, it all came at the same time. And what Loretta warned in an article recently was that the problem with mainstream media is that they almost never reflect the point of view of progressive, and they demonstrate their lack of balance in how they structure their stories in their reporting. So there are two things that come out of this picture. Sexism and racism should not surprise us in reporting. It's always happened, and it continues to happen, and it will continue to happen until we have conversations like this, discussions like this, and not just talking amongst ourselves about what the issues are, but also talking about what to do about it too. There always has to be a call to action at the end of any movement. Otherwise, you have no movement. So what I'm going to talk about is a media analysis that looks at a couple of really ugly examples, and I'm going to break them down to three different things. I'm going to focus first on how women of color reproductive justice activists are not receiving fair treatment in or from the media, how the media relies on male responses and not that of women who can best comment on our own issues, and why there is a myth amongst the media that women cannot speak on race effectively. So one of the first things I want to talk about is women of color and how we were portrayed in the media by mainstream. And I'm going to bring up a couple of examples. This is how our firestorm started. Have you heard about that billboard? Okay. So those who've not have heard about this billboard, this was a Right to Life campaign, an extreme pro-life campaign. Had this picture of this beautiful black baby on it, just as sweet. But he had a look of concern on his face, as you can see. And the terrible verbiage that was on the billboard said, "Black children are an endangered species." So there are a lot of wrongs with that. Yes, what'd you say?
It's like a different species, not human.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Black children are an endangered species. So there was a New York Times article that came out. There was a reporter from New York Times that came to what we call our mother house. That's our headquarters, called the mother house. And this reporter came and sat with us for hours on end for 2 days straight. I said, "Well, dog, do I need to feed you breakfast, lunch, and dinner? You just gonna set up shop in here?" And I've been a reporter the majority of my communications life, at least 15 years worth. It never took me that long to get information for a story. But you have to know how to ask the right questions. And a lot of times you have a lot of reporters who are asking us questions in all of our different social justice movements, and they're asking us dumb questions that don't make any sense to begin with, so therefore they can't get to a good core of relevance anyway. So this woman comes by and she asks us questions. She interviews almost everybody on the staff, and I said, "Oh my gosh." And then she talks for days on end. "Okay, so we're gonna do this, and we're gonna provide the story on these terrible billboards that." And I said, "Okay, fine. We'll see what you're gonna do with that." Well, this story failed on several fronts. And one of the fronts that it failed on was particularly coming from some relevance about RJ, reproductive justice. It failed that whole attempt. So RH Reality Check, love them dearly. They wrote an article about this issue, an article called New York Times article on myth of racial bias in abortion omits critical analyses by Ms. Jody Jacobson, the editor-in-chief. This was published March 1st of last year. So this article came out, and there are a couple of things that RH Reality Check noticed. One, the failure to explore in any real depth the factors underlying reproductive and sexual health problems among African American women. Nowhere does the article cite the actual public health data that would immediately discredit the claims of anti-choice groups using racial wedge issues to raise money and gain power. RH Reality Check also said this thing. It also failed to provide context for the widespread support among African American leaders in Congress and in public health community for expanding access to services. Number 3 thing that they saw wrong with this article, it gave inordinate amounts of space to truly questionable characters in the anti-choice movement without exploring how these groups themselves were at fault for the problem about which they profess to be so worried about. It failed to ask any questions about what the so-called right to life groups cited were doing to address the causal factors of high rates of abortion. And let me just say, too, a lot of times information is skewed. So a lot of the right to life organizations in their campaign talking about how many black women are having abortions. Oh, my gosh, so many black women having abortions. Where did you all get your numbers from? Well, 9 times out of 10, they got their numbers from public health facilities. 9 times out of 10, they were not in a position to access private doctors' information to find out how many women outside of African American women are getting abortions. So they quickly skewed the information. My problem with this is I understand they're going to skew the information. I get that. I understand that. But it's the job of the reporter to be able to find out both sides of the story. When you're in journalism school, that's the first thing they teach you day 1. Find out both sides. That's what they taught me. And you have to dig a little deeper and dig a little deeper to get to the truth, but it's your job as a credible journalist to find out both sides. You don't just take some from here and a little bit from here. You get balanced and fair reporting. This did not happen in the New York Times article. So what I'm going to bring up right now is this New York Times article. Oh, yeah. Shayla Dewan. Anti-abortion ads split Atlanta. So here's this article that she wrote. And the sad part about it was that it was a 2-parter article. And in 2 articles with I don't know how many column inches, she still couldn't get the thing right. I don't understand that. In addition, On the Issues magazine wrote about the same issue. Their article was called Loretta Ross Unmasked Black Anti-Abortion Message, Media Spin, which was written by Cindy Cooper, and it was the day after the other article had come out from RH Reality Check. So they had some issues with this too, as we did. So they reported, so how is it that the mainstream media, including the New York Times, ABC, and CNN, we got interviewed by all those other magnates too, managed to sideline Ross on a topic on which she is the leading national expert, that is, the misogyny and duplicity behind black anti-abortion campaigns. What's worse, the story was set in her backyard, yes, in Georgia, in our backyard. When Georgia Right to Life mounted exploitive billboards targeting African Americans with messages about the so-called black genocide of abortion. But in news reports on an insidious effort of anti-abortion activists to terrorize African American communities with billboards that claim black children are an endangered species and direct people to a right-wing anti-abortion website, Ross's searing analysis was skipped over. We provided a serious comprehensive analysis, and it truly was skipped over in both of the articles that came out in New York Times. So when you look at this, you also look at the fact that not only did they skip over what we provided to them, but they also skipped over mentioning a lot of the other figures that were brought to the table. Spark Reproductive Justice Now, which is based in Atlanta, was skipped over in the article. And all of us worked together on this. This was not just Sister Song. This was several other organizations that worked together, including Planned Parenthood of Georgia. They didn't say anything about them. They didn't say anything about Feminist Women's Health Center. They didn't say anything about RACSHA, which is an Atlanta Asian American domestic violence organization, along with Generations Ahead from California. They ignored all these other representations. They ignored all this work, and they just picked out little sound bites that they thought were going to be appropriate. Plus, ABC came down and talked to us, set up shop, and they were in our mother house for I don't know how long and interviewing and giving us some really good questions. And out of all of the interview, 2.41 minutes, repeated the anti-abortion arguments fully, but gave us 15 seconds to counter them. Let me say it again. They gave us 15 seconds to counter it. Without evidence, the story claims that black women have historically shunned abortion. Fortunately, all the women on the street interviewed by ABC reportedly also support our position, because they did interview several women in the streets of Atlanta, and they were saying the same things that we were saying. At least they had that little bit to go along with what we were saying. But this is still sad. On the issues, also referenced CNN. CNN created a great debate around this. And CNN did not bother contacting Sister Song or any other reproductive justice or health or rights organization to participate in the important national public debate. There was a national public debate. Catherine Davis, who is on the other side, one of the folks who helped create that ugly billboard, she was interviewed. And then they brought a black man in from the National Action Network. Now, last I remember, it's a little difficult for men to talk about womb issues unless they have a womb. Now, why are you going to bring on a male to talk about women's issues from that perspective? Yes, there are men who can talk about feminism. Yes, there is such a thing as male feminists. There are men who are abortion providers who can talk about it from a medical standpoint and talk about the relevance. There are men who fight side by side with us and support us, and they're helping us to go down to the Capitol and talk to legislators, and they're helping us to fight from a judicial standpoint. Yes, there are men out there. But when you're asking about some very core pieces of information, very relevant things, you have to go to folks who are experts. And in particular, if you're talking about women's bodies, don't you think you need to go to a woman to talk about a woman's body? I'm just asking the question. Does it make sense to you? Okay, that's what we thought. So we were skipped over in that interview also from ABC. And then we talk about CNN, ABC, MSNBC. The last thing I want to say is the myth about women not being able to speak on race effectively. And so what I'm talking about is that particular situation when you also brought on, let me say this. When we asked CNN why they decided to go and pick up a man to talk about a reproductive justice issue in quite that way, they said, well, we thought that he was an expert on race, and so we thought that he'd be the best person to talk about it. So you're saying that women can't talk about race either. Okay, so here we go. So moving forward, I'm going to talk later on about some next steps. But I just want to say that when you're looking at all these different issues, I just gave you a real quick media analysis, the same things are playing out. The same things are playing out. We're not being looked at as leaders. We're not being looked at as experts. We're not being looked at as experts, particularly on subjects that deal with our own issues. We live these things, y'all. This isn't something that we're researching out of a book. We live this. Those of us that have a womb know what it feels like to have a womb and the conditions that are surrounding us to not be able to protect our womb. Mainstream media, can you ask us what it's like? Can you ask us as experts? We're the ones who walk around day by day with our womb, caring for our womb, protecting our womb. Talk to those who have a womb. That's all I'm saying. Thank you.
So, hi, my name is Jamila King, and I'm news editor for colorlines.com. And just to get a sense, how many folks have heard of Colorlines? Oh, yay. We love you guys. We love you back. And so you all probably know a little bit about what we do, but to give a little spiel, we are a daily news site that's dedicated to providing news, analysis, and investigation that gives people the tools and the information they need to take action on the issues that they care about. And so how this breaks down in terms of our coverage of women's issues and from both a policy and an access perspective is that there are two main points that are really crucial for our work. And one is the access that women have to get online in the first place. And that's net neutrality, that's broadband adoption, that's covering issues that are really important and often really dense, and are a little difficult for people to really understand in a cohesive way. So y'all are probably familiar with net neutrality, right? Y'all know the basic gist of it. But what we do is we really try to do things like have interactive graphics, and we break these very nuanced issues down in pretty accessible ways. So you can see this is a piece that we did shortly after the Google Verizon issue that happened last summer, where they released a policy proposal that was very much not in the favor of everyday folks who get online. That was coincidentally adopted by the FCC. And so this is, just a little bit about why this is an issue that's important for people of color and women specifically. Another part of what we do in the second part that's really important is to talk about what women see when they get online. And so Serena pointed to this a bit, but the new, and we don't really like to say that it's new, but the Black anti-abortion movement that's been getting a lot of attention is something that we focused a lot of attention on. And so we have two great writers who I would definitely encourage everyone to read, and you may have already seen their work. But Akiba Solomon, who was our gender columnist.
Oh my God.
And so this is actually another billboard. So the group behind this is called Life Always. And on top of what they've done in Georgia, they've done it in several other states. So in New York City, they launched a billboard, I think it was in Midtown Manhattan? In Soho. Right. In Soho, and I can pull that picture up later, but it was an adorable little black girl. I think she was 6 years old. Her mother, who had taken her to this photo shoot, didn't even know what the photo would be used for. And it was another very provocative billboard that's saying that black abortion is wrong and evil and it's killing the race. So this is actually one that was released in Chicago, I think less than 2 weeks ago. What I think Akiba and another one of our investigative reporters, Miriam Perez, who also writes for feministing.com, they've been really good at parsing these issues out and showing that they're not new. These issues aren't new, and that these groups, though the leader of Live Action is a black man who, has his personal story about why he's against abortion, though he's never had a womb, that these groups are actually funded by very conservative white Christian groups who have for generations been pushing this idea of sexual purity on the bodies of women of color. And so that's an example of one of the things that we've done. But what was interesting about this is that our reader actually saw this and created her own spin to it. And I can pull that up a little bit later, but she had an image of Malcolm X. And similar to how this image of Obama is up there, and basically pointing out that, like every couple years we have a black martyr who's killed or a black person who's killed because they don't have food or access to education or whatever. And so that was a way that our information that we gave folks led them to action. And so that was something that we were really happy to see. And then lastly, like I mentioned, Miriam Perez's work has been really good in showing the historical context of this work. And so for us as a media organization that's focused specifically on racial justice, it's very important for us to give folks an idea of where all this comes from. And so Miriam Perez did a very in-depth investigative look at who's been funding these movements, at where they've been coming from, and basically showing us that it's not new and it's not going to go away anytime soon, and that we need to take action. So I'm happy to talk a little bit later about what that looks like on the day-to-day, but thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yana Walton. I'm the Vice President of Communications for the Women's Media Center based in New York City. I am here today to talk about a lot of the work that we do and also some of this policy that is really shaping the types of coverage that we get. I come from a career of media activism. I was working in Utah for Planned Parenthood. I was also the director of communications for the Gay and Lesbian Community Center there, and then went on to work for GLAAD in 12 southern states. So doing some really difficult work in some conservative areas, and this stuff also just isn't happening within these conservative areas. It's really happening within progressive media as well when we're talking about sexism carrying over in the media. I would like to start out by showing you a very, very short video that just brings up some of the statistics around women, not only in news media, but also entertainment media, that shows you how pervasive of a problem this is, and will really help us think about not only holding a lot of the conservative outlets, like Fox, but also, women-owned progressive outlets like the Huffington Post, who is running story after story after story of, Lindsay Lohan tit pics, when we've got an election to be covering and real issues that matter to women and everyone in America. So I think that that's one of the things that we really need to think about when we are doing some of this media analysis work, is not only holding the conservative outlets and the mainstream outlets, but also the independent outlets to the same sort of standards, because sexism is sexism no matter how you find it. I think it's also very important to defend women on both sides of the aisle from sexist media coverage, because if you are attacking, Sarah Palin or Michelle Bachmann based on her gender and not on her platform, what you're really doing is hurting all women. There are plenty of crazy things that Christine O'Donnell is going to say that we can attack her on, and not just because she has a womb. So I'd like to start out with this quick video that we made. I traveled to the Sundance Film Festival with a group of really young girl bloggers that I trained to blog and interview folks at Sundance about the lack of women, both in front of and behind the camera in the film industry, that will kind of highlight some of this, and then I'll talk a little bit more about some of the new research that we've been doing. But just so you know, a lot of the stats that come up in this film are done by the Center for Research for Women in Film and Television at San Diego State University.
So I watch the wave, take your fear and toward the horizon. Point, you have a word for every woman you can lay your eyes on. Like you own just because you bought the time. And you turn to me, you say you hope I'm not threatened. Oh, I'm not that petty. As cool as I am, I thought you'd know this already. I will not be afraid of women. I will not be afraid of women. So now we're at a club, we watch the woman dance, and she is drunk, and she is smiling, and she's falling in a slow descending funk. And the whole bar is loud and proud, and everybody's trying, yeah. You play the artist, saying is it how she moves or how she looks? I say it's loneliness, suspended to our own like grappling hooks. And as long as she's got noise, she's fine. But I could teach her how I learned to dance when the music's ended. Oh, 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 and that's not heavy. As cool as I am, I thought you know this already. I will not be afraid of women. I will not be afraid of women.
This data is from 2010, so this really isn't old stuff. And what these centers look at every time they do this research, year after year, that things really, really have not been changing from the 80s, really. There was recently, very recently, just a couple of weeks ago, the International Women's Media Foundation, who is separate from us, just published a report showing how internationally this is also really, really the case. And there's a lot of great information there if you'd like to look up that study. But I don't want to rattle off any more statistics for you. I think that we know that the picture is so bleak. I would like to tell you a little bit about a campaign that our organization ran during the 2010 midterm elections in conjunction with the Women's Campaign Forum that looked at the impact of sexist media coverage on women candidates running, both on the local level and also on the national level. It was called the Name It, Change It campaign. I think, one of the most groundbreaking things that we did was look at, hold conservative outlets and progressive outlets to the same standards, and mainstream and independent outlets to the same standards. And also we were defending women who had these gender-based attacks on both sides of the aisle. Some of the research that we did about this, we commissioned Celinda Lake and Lake Research Associates. We polled 800 likely voters. We compared a male candidate and a female candidate, and we measured both sort of candidate-to-candidate attacks. So when a male candidate would make a sexist attack on his female opponent, and also just sexist media coverage of women. And we measured when the attack was based on her platform or based on her gender. And what we found was that voter confidence dropped twice as fast when it was a comment made on her gender rather than her platform. And we also saw that it was actually hurting male candidates too. So this was some pretty valuable information, that when male candidates engage in these sorts of attacks, it also hurts them. One of the most interesting things we found, so we wanted to measure then, how our campaign responds to this. How can we regain that voter confidence in these women candidates? Because, as we saw, for the first time in 30 years, we lost the number of women in both the House and the Senate. So we're about 17% of Congress right now, and we're 50% of the population. So obviously not living in a representative democracy at all. So what happened when organizations and also the candidates themselves called this out and said, you know what, this is a sexist attack. What I'm really here to talk about is this, instead of do what most campaign managers say, which is like, all women who are running are getting these horrible, horrible attacks. The best thing to do is ignore it, move on, talk about the economy. That's been sort of the traditional way of dealing with a lot of these attacks. But now we found out that we measured that when women actually just call it out and say it like it is and move on, and organizations come to their defense, they're able to regain a lot of that. So very important for women running in 2012. We are really, really gearing up, and I think that one of the solutions to some of this, to a more fair media policy, is working with a lot of journalists and reporters. I think a lot of the times sexism is so pervasive in the media that we don't even know it's happening. Sure, we see some of the sexualized images of young girls and can call that out very easily as sexist, but there's also some of the more seemingly innocuous things that happen where just 2 days before the Israeli-Palestinian peace talks last year, the Washington Post devoted a 800-word piece on Hillary Clinton's new hairdo. There's certainly, the Huffington Post did, over 24 articles on this new hairdo. All of these things, all of these women who are running for the Senate are getting, articles written about, what brand of blazer they're purchasing. And we also measured that in the research that we did around sexist coverage of women candidates. And we showed that when it was a really, really deeply misogynistic attack, like we just heard, Bill Maher called Sarah Palin a dumb T-word a few days ago. And if it's just something really, really innocuous, like, oh man, you've got some Kate Spade shoes, that's really cute. How does that work when you're walking around canvassing? Which is what the New York Times did recently. The damage to women candidates is actually the same, and so it really doesn't matter. And sometimes this isn't even called out as sexism. So we were really working on this as a kind of holding media accountable for the very first time. And I think part of the solution is showing this data to news directors, to newsrooms, to editors, and going in and working with reporters, going into J schools and talking to students who will be the next generation of reporters, and kind of posing this. One of my bosses is Gloria Steinem, and it's great to have access to her mind on a daily basis, and she really puts it so clearly. She says, reversibility is so key. If you're not going to write an article about John Edwards' shoes as he's canvassing, then would you write that about Hillary? All of these things. So really getting in there and working with folks to ensure that they just understand sexism and can call it out for what it is. I think that that also another really, really big policy issue isn't just, who's writing about it and who's owning these big conglomerates that are talking about women's issues, but also talking to the advertisers that are funding these pieces. A lot of the times, there are women's magazines like More Magazine and Mary Claire and Glamour that arguably have done, so much to damage the rights of women in our countries, but that are really working with us and working with the Women's Media Center quite regularly to produce some pretty substantive pieces. But what kind of message does it send when there's, an airbrushed and photoshopped and, women with an eating disorder selling weight loss products next to a piece on Senator Gillibrand? And so really it's targeting the advertisers, not just the owners, and not just the producers. I end up working with actually Fox News all the time to try to get, because their viewership is so large, to try to get, some of this stuff open to, or out there for a broader audience. And a lot of the times I'm realizing that the producers that I work with are they're like, Yana, just so you know, we're totally on your team, so a lot of the problem is with the ownership and not necessarily the employees, and then the advertisers that are paying for this. And so I think a lot of the times it's absolutely worth it to look at, who owns this, but also who owns the companies that are advertising on these areas. It's really been one of the strategies that the women's rights movement and the gay rights movement has used a lot of the time to say, or a lot of time and resources into targeting advertisers and saying, look at this really, really, anti-women program, and you're funding this, pull your advertising, but also to look at the advertisers who are, on the flip side, looking at the advertisers that are really, really willing to fund all of this stuff, and then call them out using media and using our voices and creating our own media as women to call that out in a public way. I think so many of these issues are linked. I actually just learned that the so-called Black genocide billboard that was put up recently in Chicago, the one that you had shown, the board member that was quoted in all of the articles from Life Always was also the gentleman who ran the anti-marriage campaign that was just defeated in Maryland. We were very, very close to achieving marriage for gay and lesbian couples. And so this is all tied together. They're attacking my rights as a queer woman. They're attacking your rights. They're attacking all of our rights. And I think that it's really, really important to take a look at all of these as very connected issues. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Lisa Bennett. I'm the Communications Director at the National Organization for Women. Thanks. And I'll tell you a little bit more about myself as I go through the presentation. When I talk about media policy being a women's issue, I like to go through sort of 3 steps, which is defining the crime, identifying the perp, and strategizing for justice. So the first step, which is defining the crime, is what's the problem? So the problem is that the media reinforce a sexist society, and they do this in 2 ways. They marginalize and exploit women, and they keep women in the dark. So we're going to go back first to marginalizing and exploiting women. And I could come up with a million examples of this, but I've chosen just a few that I thought worked well together. I think one of the biggest issues for women is the association of sex and violence. And so I have 4 images that take us through actually 4 different forms of media. Wow, they're kind of dark, huh? The first one in the upper left-hand side is a Calvin Klein ad. The actress, actually Eva Mendes, is in that ad, and there's a possibility that she's just in rapture there, but she's also lying on the ground and dirty and kind of slimy, and we're not quite sure what's happening, but there's a chance that she's really into it. The image right next to that one is from a horrible movie, Observe and Report, where the actress Anna Faris, her character is drunk and has vomited, and the man that she's on a date with is proceeding to have sex with her. So we're pretty sure that she's not into it, although the screenwriters gave her a line where she puts her head up for a second and tells the guy to keep going. So I guess that's permission for him to continue. The image that's really hard to see here is from the HBO show True Blood, which I myself enjoy. But this scene was so horrific, I could barely watch it. The woman vampire who is the villain in the piece is basically having sex with the man who she made him into a vampire. And he's angry at her, and he turns her head completely around while they're having sex. And so we get to the final image, which is of a video, a music video from Christina Aguilera. And now we've gotten to the point where her face is completely covered with a mask while she's being ravaged by various people. Another favorite of the media is to be all outraged by, in this case, it's Aaron Andrews from ESPN, who there was a stalker, someone who was peeking at her. So they're all outraged by this. But what does the media love more than voyeurism? And just an example is Burger King created a website where you could go on and watch women sing in the shower. And this woman, yes, she does have burgers on her breasts. Another example I like to show people in defining the crime are some pictures that were taken from the very same magazine of two celebrities, Robert Downey Jr. and Christina Ricci. And you can see the completely different way that they are presented. He's on a bicycle, he's pointing a gun, actually, at the viewer. So he is hostile, and she is completely vulnerable, looking down. And then another example, again, from the same magazine, two celebrities presented two completely different ways. George Clooney is all carefree, again, riding a bicycle. I guess guys riding bikes is this fun way to relive your childhood. Meanwhile, Jessica Alba is spilling water down her front, as we know women do all the time. I believe it's GQ. One or both of them are GQ. One might be Maxim, which then it really wouldn't be a surprise. So the other way is keeping women in the dark. We know that in order to be empowered, we have to be informed. So therefore, the media keep us uninformed and misinformed, and therefore disempowered. And there's a number of ways they do this, but again, I think focusing on the issue of violence against women is an important way to talk about this. And what they so often do when they talk about violence issues is they sensationalize, they simplify, and they shift the blame. And this is an instance of the Today Show bringing on one of their experts who kindly was blaming the young woman from UVA who was killed, allegedly, I guess I have to say, by her boyfriend. Again, just another case of how much the media enjoy reporting on missing and murdered women, but they don't at all care about talking about the deeper issues involved in violence against women.
But it's mainly white women.
Yes, it's the missing white woman of the week, usually a blonde, attractive, young woman. Again, there are so many women absent in this picture, and there's no depth whatsoever. And it's funny because they keep reporting on it again and again. You would think they would see a pattern, but they don't. So our second question is who, what are behind this? And this is identifying the perp. Here we know that we've got the owners at the top, and then you've got your top level decision makers, you've got your producers and your editors, your anchors and your reporters, and all of that brings us the content. But the problem, as my fellow panelists have said, is that the top two are almost predominantly white men. Women and people of color make up a minuscule percentage of those top two categories, which you can hardly see anymore. Now, this is where we get to some of my experience. Before I came to Now, I worked at a television rep firm, and we were the go-between between the TV stations and the advertising agencies. We helped the TV stations sell their commercial airtime to the corporate clients that worked with the ad agencies. But what they were really doing was they were bringing consumers, or suckers, as they like to think of us, together with the merchants, or the peddlers, as I like to think of them. And what did I learn in this industry? Well, I learned that ratings equal money, and that relaxing ownership rules is good, because most of the owners that we worked with at the television rep firm where I worked wanted to gobble up more and more stations. And we actually put together a report while I was there. I didn't have anything to do with the report, but I worked there at the time, about how this was good for the market, for fewer and fewer owners to own more and more stations. Well, now I'm on the right side of that equation, and I know that it's not good. Our third question is, what can we do? And this is strategizing for justice. And so I want to talk a little bit about what NOW has been doing over the years. NOW has been around for 45 years now, and we've been doing this for a long time, and it can get really frustrating. I looked back at our history. In 1971, we called on the FCC to guarantee fair treatment of women in broadcasting. In 1972, we filed a petition to deny license renewal to WABC-TV in New York due to sex discrimination. In 1977, we established a National Media Reform Committee. And in 1979, we urged Congress and federal agencies to include feminist views in the debate on the future of telecommunications. And we're continuing to do all of these things. Some of the more recent things we've been doing is we have a Love Your Body Day campaign, which has been around since 1998, and we have a poster contest every year. This is one of my favorite entries ever from our poster contest, and it says under, if you can't read under I Love My Thighs, it says, "Sound ridiculous? Why?" We, in the early 2000s, we had a Watch Out, Listen Up feminist report on primetime TV, and we declared Fox a network of shame, and we had activists around the country protesting outside of Fox stations. We have an ongoing Media Hall of Shame, which we introduced during the 2008 elections when we just couldn't take it anymore, the coverage particularly of Hillary. And initially it just covered campaign coverage, but now it's all kinds of media that we take on. And just this year we introduced, under the Love Your Body Day umbrella, a campaign called Let's Talk About It, where we're encouraging young women, or any women really, to create videos talking about how the media make them feel. It can be about having an eating disorder or overcoming an eating disorder, but you don't have to have had an eating disorder to make a video. And so we're posting those videos. We also got some of our favorite activists and even some models to contribute videos to the campaign. Just to sort of summarize about the action component of this, I think it's important to engage people in discussing media content, because you can get people to talk about media content almost any time. People are dying to talk about it. And then you move them to action. You get them to write letters to the media, write letters to the advertisers, and get them involved. And then you broaden their understanding, and you move on to some of the more complicated issues like media ownership, net neutrality, and access to high-speed internet. Through that, we can all join together, because it was Jacqueline Friedman in the Women's Caucus yesterday who said, we are a force to be reckoned with. We haven't just demanded that they reckon with us, and that's what we need to do. So thanks.
Thank you, panelists. That was great. So I think one of the things that's really important for us to remember, and the name of this panel is media policy. And one of the things that, Lisa, you got to, but I want to push on a little bit more, is that it's not just the owners that are creating these decisions that sort of stifle female voices. It goes beyond that, and it goes to the policies and the laws that have allowed this media system to happen. And so it's important that as we have these conversations about content, and we have these conversations about owners who are, making these decisions, that we bring it back to the lawmakers who have allowed this rampant media consolidation to come up and allow all of these owners to buy up more and more and more stations, to allow cross-media ownership to happen. So they are owning radio stations, they own newspapers, they own, the TV channels, and then suddenly they become bankrupt, and they're not seeing the same returns that they used to on Wall Street. So they are creating content that is cheap and easy to produce, which is reality programming, and it's celebrity gossip, and it's junk news, and it's putting pundits up on screen that just yell back and forth to one another, usually male. And it's very important that as we continue this conversation, that we remember that we have to hold our lawmakers accountable for the situation that we now see. I just want to tell people about a new study by the International Women's Media Foundation shows that gender inequality is rampant in the news industry, like we know, with less than 1/3 of women in leadership and decision-making roles at news companies. And even though women make up 51% of the population, they own less than 6% of commercial TV and radio stations. So that ownership, again, goes back to media policies and laws that have allowed this to happen. So we're going to break this up into 3 different issues to talk to the panelists about media ownership, net neutrality, and public broadcasting, and we'll take comments from the panelists, and then we'll just take your questions and have a conversation. So my first question that pops up that has to do with media ownership, and it really was triggered, Serena, by some of the articles you showed. A lot of those articles were written by women, and I'm wondering how this ownership structure that we're seeing trickles down and affects female reporters, and sort of what they are facing in the newsrooms and in both progressive and mainstream media outlets, and if folks have comments about that.
I'm going to comment from the standpoint of me being on the other side of the fence when I was an investigative reporter working for a black newspaper. And when I was working for a black newspaper, it was interesting because when all of us entry-level, fresh out of J school reporters came and we all want to talk about different things and interview people about different issues and just get really hardcore, it was funny to me because all the folks that were in the editorial circle at this newspaper in Atlanta were all males. I was the only woman that was there. And when the hardcore articles came up, the hardcore ideas came up, my hand was looking like Hermione from Harry Potter. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this. And the men would kind of back up a little bit. So I found myself doing more of the investigative reporting at our newspaper. Well, I began to really enjoy digging for facts. And again, fair, balanced facts. There's facts that can be skewed, but then there's fair reporting and balanced reporting where you get everything that you need to get. So it's up to the consumer to make their judgment call. You don't make that judgment call. You, not as a reporter, you let the consumer make that judgment call. And so as I was doing a lot of investigative reporting and began to really dig into some of the nonprofit organizations that were in Atlanta, homeless agencies that were doing a lot of mismanagement, they were really getting involved in a lot of underhanded things. As I began to talk more about this, the nonprofit agency began to call our publisher and said they had some concerns about how I was reporting. Now, mind you, they weren't giving me many comments when I would go interview them. They would say very little, so they had the opportunity to give me some sound bites. They chose not to do it, so therefore I can't report on something that doesn't exist. So my publisher got a little unnerved about that and began to tell me to just pull back a little bit. And I said, so you let me out to do what I want to do. You allow me to have the wherewithal to report on these things, but now you're pulling me back? So what are you trying to do? And he says, well, you know, we've got some legal issues, and I really don't want this to get out of hand. And you've got an anonymous source who hasn't come forward, and now they're pushing for that. And I said, so now you want me to give up my anonymous source? You know, what is this about? And they said, well, you know, there could be a possibility of you facing a little bit of jail time if it continues to get that far on your anonymous source, because it was a really huge homeless agency in Atlanta, really huge homeless agency in Atlanta. And so I said, here are my risks. Take me. If I told this person that I was going to tell their story and protect their anonymity, then take me now. Don't wait till tomorrow. Take me now, please. And so they kind of backed up. So then I got reassigned to fashion. So now, here it is. I want to continue to be in journalism. I want to continue to be a news reporter, but now my publisher, a male, is backing down and is afraid that we are going to uncover some things that he's not ready to protect. He wasn't ready to protect my voice as a reporter. So therefore, I call it a demotion. That was not a lateral move by any means. That was a demotion to fashion. So I just want to say that, yes, publishers and people who own media, they have the responsibility, and we have to hold them accountable for that, because you'd be surprised how many underhanded things are going on behind the scenes regarding money deals, regarding publicity, regarding, well, I can't talk about this because that happens to be a friend that I play golf with on Friday afternoons. You never know what's going on behind. You never know what's going on. You never know. How do you hold people accountable? Let me ask a question back to the audience. Let me ask a question back to the audience. Based on what you've seen of any successful means of holding news agencies accountable, what examples have you seen? Boycotting, demonstrating. She talked about talking to legislators. Talking to legislators, that's where in my mind it really begins, because one of the next steps I was going to provide was that a lot of the media agencies that are reporting really need to be hollering at y'all at Women's Media Center to get some information, and those of us who were being interviewed need to be trained by y'all too, so that we know how to better debate, we know how to get our foot in the door a little bit better too. But there's not one good answer. My point is that there's not one good answer. There's not one good answer to that. So I'm not going to take up everybody else's time who may want to comment on this. Please.
I wanted to say that the report that we're talking about, the International Women's Media Foundation report, after they came out with all of these findings, and looking at Europe, looking at Asia, looking at the U.S., all of the ownership, women in front of the camera, behind the camera, women as editors, reporters, all of these things, and looking at how sort of how short we're faring up across the board, they recommended as a policy change actual quota system for women. That's one of their solutions. So owners need to look at hiring women at all of these different levels at a certain percentage that's coming from all of the applicants, all of the qualified women, and looking at women, the population of women as a whole. So I'm not sure. This is really recently. The articles came out a couple of weeks ago. Folks are arguing for quotas within media, and I would love to hear. We've certainly seen quotas be effective in some areas. We've seen some really anti-quota effective arguments that have been very effective in sort of anti-quota in hiring for many years. It's a very loaded discussion in our country, but I would love to hear from the other panelists what you think about establishing quotas for women within media organizations.
I can't speak on behalf of NOW because I don't know if we have an official position on quotas, but I mean, to be honest, I think it's, I'm supposed to stand up. Sorry. I think quotas sound like a great idea. I mean, we just advertised for the NOW press secretary position, which, by the way, if you know anyone who's interested, go to the NOW website, now.org. And I got tons and tons. I mean, this idea that there aren't enough qualified women out there and that's why they're not getting the jobs, that's bull. I got so many amazing resumes from people who quite frankly, we can't afford because they've been working in the media for years. And in addition, they've been doing community activism and they've been training people in the media. I mean, people with incredible experience. So this idea that there are women out there that can't fill those roles, that you would have to hire a less qualified woman in order to fill that quota, that's just not so.
I just want to add really quickly that quotas sound like a really good idea, but you want to make sure that those folks know what they're talking about. So obviously, you want to have experienced folks who are leading these organizations, but as Megan pointed out, a lot of those articles are written by women, and unless you give them actual power in a media organization, unless they're actually the owner or the publisher, then, we'll see more of the same. So.
Thank you. That was a good point. One thing I just want to trail off with is, at some point, we're going to have to figure out a way to not only encourage women to come into news reporting agencies and better report, but we're going to have to also push women ownership as well. The thing that I love about working for and working with a women-oriented, women-issue, women-run, women-owned publication is the fact that we get to tell our story the way that we want to tell our story. We have the autonomy to be able to do that, and I think what we really have to do is push women to own these agencies, push women to have our own media. And yes, finances are going to be at the core of that. That's another discussion. So I'll trail that on back to you.
Well, speaking about the ability to tell our own stories, the internet has been the most revolutionizing tool for women, enabling us to tell our own stories and circumvent traditional media gatekeepers. We don't have to ask permission from anyone to get our stories across, to start our own blogs, start our own websites, and it's been amazing. The problem is that the open internet, net neutrality, is at risk. And so I'm wondering, and net neutrality is a policy issue, and I'm wondering for Jamila, who's done a lot of reporting on this, if you could talk a little bit about why net neutrality is a really important issue for women to be concerned about.
As Megan just mentioned, net neutrality is basically the law that's been guiding the internet, that's allowed us to tell our stories. But when it comes to media ownership, I think when you go back to that, what's interesting is that a lot of what happened in 1996 with the Telecommunications Act is it kind of set in motion a lot of the problems that we're seeing now. For me, as a person who's been covering this for quite a while, it's been interesting to see how little action the FCC has taken. And I guess looking at the history of the FCC, that's not completely surprising when you see how often they're sort of beholden to other interests and how hard it is for really progressive folks on the FCC to do their job well. Mignon Kleinburn, who's a really fantastic woman who's on the FCC commission, is here now, and not here in this panel, but she's at this conference. And I think it's really important to push folks like that on this issue. But I think what it really boils down to is making sure that people know what it is, right? We kind of heard like what net neutrality is, but being really well versed in the issue, breaking it down so that folks understand, and folks understand in a way that they can take action on is really, really important. So at Colorlines, we've tried to do that. But I think all too often when it's covered in mainstream press, they give like the blow-by-blow of what happened at this meeting and why it's important, but they don't give you why it's happening now or what's really at stake. And so I think as progressive media makers, that's where we can really step in and do that work and really make sure that folks have the tools that they need to take action.
The final policy issue that we'll take a look at is public media and public broadcasting, which I'm sure most of you know is under attack right now. Public broadcasting can often offer a place for women to share their stories and from their own perspectives, and provides programming that more accurately represents local female populations. The cuts to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting won't just affect NPR and PBS. They will affect 1,300 locally owned non-commercial media stations across the country. So I'm wondering from our panelists what you're thinking about as you see these potential cuts and how that may affect female representation on a very local level.
I think that what is going on with these cuts, as somebody who has worked for various women's organizations in a communications capacity and pitching a lot of these stories when I'm really unsuccessful in mainstream media, those are the folks, those are our friends. They're the ones that I reach out to, and every time they're picking up my story, they're seeing folks that do our work, as comm directors, as resources to them and not as nuisances. I'm not, sitting there pitching a new video game or something. I'm pitching a story that has happened to a woman journalist. I'm pitching stories about women experts, and not only women experts on traditionally women's issues or feminist issues, but also women who are experts in Afghanistan, experts on healthcare, and really making sure that those voices are inserted too, because we need women experts across the board being valued. And so a lot of these small public radio stations, and radio is one of the types of media that has not been dying as fast as like the print magazine per se, because when people can listen to podcasts as they go and online, and so especially radio, when there's such great allies of the work that we do, and we don't see them we see people using that media more and more, but we see these funding cuts. I think it's very, very scary.
So this might be taken a number of ways, but I was visiting PBS Boston last night, and I was on a show called Basic Black. And it was funny because kind of a caricature that we talked about was Pookie, right? Like everybody has a cousin Pookie, whatever. And so we were talking about that in the context of unemployment, right? To make it accessible, to make sure that folks we're talking about the fact that a lot of folks who came out to vote in 2008 are really frustrated. A lot of young black folks are really frustrated with the lack of action, with the lack of accountability, with the lack of even attention that they've gotten from the federal government and the administration in particular. But the fact that we could have that sort of candid discussion and bring it home to the family front was really important for us. And that's PBS, right? That's sort of what was talked about in terms of what we get when we have public television. And if we don't have that, then we get Pookie talked about in a whole different way on Fox, right? We get very dangerous representations of what our community is and the folks who are part of our community. So.
Sister Song's experience in media coverage, and I'm going to come from this angle, has been very satisfying in terms of progressive radio. Radio is always knocking on our door. we get so many more interviews and media requests from radio than the law allows, and I'm always filtering those interview requests. And the good thing about radio is that they take the time to, and I'm not talking about all radio now. Let's be clear. I'm just talking about progressive and feminist radio right now. That's just two. But they do a really good job of researching the topics. I can't tell you how many mainstream electronic media outlets and print media outlets and online media outlets are just asking the most ridiculous questions, and we're looking at them like, honey, we need to educate you on what RJ means before you even interview us. And a lot of times I'm talking to reporters like, first of all, do you know what RJ means? Let me hear you say what RJ means. If you even have a concept of it, then maybe we can talk. Otherwise, I need you to go back to your table, go back to your laptop, do some research, go on our website, on the homepage, mission statement, go find out what we're about, then come back and ask me a far more intelligent question than what you've been proposing to me. So radio, on the other hand, I can't speak for mainstream radio because we have been kicked off of the Laura Ingraham show, I'm proudly to say. Because we called Laura Ingraham a racist. And so we got disconnected before Loretta was even able to finish the statement. So we've had that other side too. But I do certainly encourage public radio to continue doing what they're doing, particularly in the progressive standpoint. It'd be great if more of your mainstream radio would take a look at this, because every time I'm trying to talk to local radio in Atlanta about some of the issues that we've got on the table and how we're responding to these issues, they say, yeah, okay. And I said, but this is about black women. I'm contacting a black radio station. Yeah, we're going to get back to you on that. But there's this, really great concert that's going on right now. And, and Puff Daddy is doing this and P. Diddy is doing this. and so I have that kind of response from them, which is really ill to me. But we are happy that progressive and feminist radio are doing a really good job in research, and we hope that spans out. It's great to even see women producers of these shows. We have a lot of great response from women producers as well, who really look at the issues, take to heart the issues, and they keep us in their mental Rolodex when these things come up, and they know how to find the experts on this, and that's what it's about too, is them even knowing how to find the right people and making sure that those folks are being trained properly too, so that we know how to respond to these interviews when they come around.
So I know that we're running a little behind, so I want to get to questions. And I guess my final two questions to the panel is, we have some fellows in the audience, and I'm wondering, why should men care about how women are represented in the media and how the ownership structures exist the way that they do? And what do we do about all of the stuff we've talked about today?
So as far as why men should care about the ways in which women are portrayed in the media, I think that we've done a really good, one of the successes, I think, of the women's movement over the last few years has been to really show how sexism also is really, really negatively impacting men. I think that if we look at a good piece of legislation that has been proposed recently that Girl Scouts of America is taking on, called the Healthy Media for Youth Act, really holding media outlets having laws that hold media outlets accountable for media that really sexualizes images of young women, but also all of the violent images that correspond with the violence towards women that are put on young men. Certainly does a lot to hurt young men. It's shown that it gets them in trouble later in life. All of these things, and so it's as soon as it's a women's issue, it's a people's issue. As soon as it's a male issue, it's a women's issue as well. And I think that it's extraordinarily important that we really keep in mind that it hurts everyone as we are doing these things. I wanted to also briefly touch on public media for one more second, because I know that NPR has gotten a lot of slack recently. The study that showed that 26% of their sources were women's sources, and I know that they're working very, very hard to combat that. But that's something to also be aware of, that we need to also be working with a lot of these outlets that are not doing a good job, that still are public radio, of making that aware, and on our part doing a lot of pitching of women and of trained women. We train women all the time to become to respond in sort of really hostile debate, kind of like split screen Fox News debates. O'Reilly and Hannity. We have a lot of the progressive base of women that we've trained go through our program that have gone on these programs. And so I think, preparing women to do that and then pitching them out, and especially pitching them to outlets, like national NPR, that has been shown to have a pretty poor track record to date of women guests as well. But that said, when we get women's perspectives, we're really representing all of America, and that's really impacting men. It's impacting our sons and all of that.
Women's issues are human rights issues. Very simply put. Immigration issues are human rights issues. Environmental issues are human rights issues. Racism issues are human rights issues. They're all connected. And until we get to a point where we raise the conscious level of all people, because I can't tell you how many women have perpetuated the crime too. I can't tell you how many women have perpetuated the crime as well. So we just can't make the assumption that just because a woman is out there on the front lines reporting or representing, that she's going to be saying and doing and making decisions for the best interest of other women. We have too many examples out there now that you can call out all day long until the conference is over with, in terms of women who are backstabbing other women. Again, women's issues are human rights issues. We're going to have to raise the consciousness of all people as a whole to get people to understand that when we make bad decisions about human rights, we impact all, and all suffer. That's all I have to say about that.
Hi, so my name is Kamala Lopez, and I'm the president of Heroica Films. I'm the president of Heroica Films, which is a film production company that makes media by, about, with, and for women. And I am heading up the new national media campaign to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. I started out as an actress. Just quick anecdote. In the first year that I started acting professionally, my last name is Lopez, by the way, I played 8 Marias, 4 Doloreses. I had just graduated from Yale University in philosophy, and I was surprised. I always had to do a weird accent that I had to learn because I didn't know how to speak that way. And ultimately, I started writing my own stuff so that I could put a different image out there of Latinas and women in general. I want to say that the Equal Rights Amendment is the foundation of what we're talking about here, because until we can close the gender pay gap, which right now for Latinas is 59 cents on the male dollar, 68 cents for black women, 77 cents for white women. When we close that gap, we will have power. Until we have federal equal rights in this country for all women, we are not on a level playing field. That needs to be the basis and foundation of what we have to do right now. 90% of the American population believes we have equal rights under the law. We have to tell them that we don't, and that will immediately resolve at least the beginning of this problem, in my view.
In response to that, I want to, somebody recently proposed doing away with the 14th Amendment, and I remind people that Phil Schlafly used to tell us we didn't need the Equal Rights Amendment because we had the 14th Amendment. But my question is, and my suggestion is, I wish we would do some more aggressive and proactive campaigns and go after, not always have to be on the defensive. For example, on the issue of reproductive rights and all of this BS about, no federal money going for abortions. Federal money is going for Viagra for Afghanistan warlords. Federal money is going to kill people, usually brown people, all around the world. Why don't we have a campaign so that our tax money doesn't have to go for this? These warmongers who suddenly get sentimental about fetuses just drive me mad.
My name is Linda Masuris. This way? Yeah. Okay. And I teach at a community college here in Boston. And because I do that, I'm very aware of the fact that there are more young men of color involved with the criminal justice system than there are in higher education. And I am also aware of the fact that unemployment in the current economic crisis has disproportionately affected men. At the same time, going back decades, I have been involved with the issue of what happens to women as caretakers and how caretaking work is undervalued. I think it's extremely interesting that right now, with the push against public sector unions, what's going to start happening is a lot of women who work disproportionately in the healthcare and education sectors are losing their jobs. And my question to you all is how we can bring in the notion that a vast class of people, men, women, people of color, less educated and whites who have been pushed out of the manufacturing sector, immigrants, a vast class of people is becoming increasingly is falling increasingly out of the economy. And those people are pushing against each other. And what can we do about that?
One thing that I would say is that we have an election coming up, right? And we have a president who desperately wants to be reelected, but hasn't really articulated why we should reelect him. Right. I mean, so I think it's a good point to realize that, every month unemployment figures are coming out, and DC is very excited because our unemployment is supposedly dropping. But you're right that those numbers don't count the thousands, and in some cases millions of folks who've completely dropped out of the economy. And so I think for us moving forward, it's really important that we push our lawmakers to articulate that. We push our lawmakers and, even our president to really double down and say, well, this is the problem, right?
Choice. I mean, if you don't vote for Obama, who do we vote for?
That's a good question.
I mean, you're saying go out and do that, but I mean, we have done it before. We worked for him, we were fought for it, and
Right.
here we are, and they look like he's helpless.
Right. Well, then show them that your vote's not going to be an easy one to get. So.
Yeah. Well, I think also very quickly, I know there's so many questions. Remembering that this conference is called Change the Media, Change the World, and that everything that you've just talked about is all underscored by the health of our media system. And one of the reasons why we're all fighting against each other and see each other and we're polarized is because of the way the media portrays us and other people. And so it all comes back, again, I'm kind of bringing it full circle to media policy and the laws that have allowed all of this structure to come about. So really making sure that when you leave this conference this weekend, you know that there are ways that you can fight back against media consolidation, you can fight for net neutrality, you can fight for public media and public broadcasting, because when we have a more diverse, localized media system, a lot of those problems that you see will start to fade away a little bit more. I think we can have one more question.
My name is Bernadette. I talk really loud anyway. So It's not really a question. I run a internet radio station for girls called girlsradio.org, and we are located right here in Dorchester, in the city of Boston. And it's not necessarily a question. It's more of a, I guess, a charge to a lot of the women who are out here today speaking about communications. You know, we call women to try to interview them to make sure that our girls have a lot of role models and women that will be supportive of what they're doing and the work they're doing in terms of their civic engagement, involvement in the community, and making the community aware of all these issues going on with young women today. And my charge is when we call, answer, because they need to hear from you all about all of the things you spoke today. I mean, these two young ladies right here were pretty intrigued with all the information, and there are more of us roaming around this building today. So just when we call you, please answer us. That's all.
Thank you so much for saying that. I also wanted to let you know that one of the initiatives that we will be taking on this next year at the Women's Media Center is not only the Progressive Women's Voices, the intensive media training program that we've been doing, but we're going to be doing Progressive Girls Voices training program. A lot of the women that we took to the Sundance Film Festival, and I did a lot of blogger training and interview training with them, and we're going to be also offering webinars. So for everyone that we can't fly, we're trying to get this stuff online and really train girls in order to be interviewees and interviewers. So get in touch with us as well, because that's obviously, you're doing amazing work, and we'll pick up the phone and we'll train girls too. So.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.
And I wanted to say one more thing. We have to demonstrate to the lawmakers that they know that the majority of us, what side we're on, that we support reproductive rights and we support unions. But we've got to demonstrate to them that we're out there and that we care. So think of that one friend of yours who's not very political. You know they agree with you, but they really don't do much. And I'm going to do it too, and pressure them to join an organization and sign up for action alerts and start sending messages to their legislators, because they have to hear from us. We're out there, but they have to hear from us.
Thank you. I know there's folks who still have questions, but we're running out of time, so feel free to approach the panelists afterwards for a few minutes, and thank you so much for attending.